Bitcoin spot ETFs, Bitcoin halving. These are things that we are looking forward to seeing in 2024. Will these key moments in history drive the price of Bitcoin up to 100,000, 200,000, or even $1 million Bitcoin? We're going to discuss just that in today's video. I'm going to roll that intro and then we're going to get right down into it. Hi guys, welcome back to the channel, welcome back to another walk and talk. Just grabbing the camera, getting away from the desk and talking to you guys about what is going on in the space. Now, as you guys are more than well aware of by now, there's a couple of key things that are likely to happen over in 2024. We do obviously have eager eyes on Bitcoin spot ETFs, specifically BlackRock and some of those real big players in terms of asset managers. Now, a Bitcoin spot ETF is going to be major news for cryptocurrencies, not just Bitcoin. There's many different ETFs for Bitcoin, okay, in terms of spot ETFs. We also see some Ethereum spot ETFs, which I think is going to drive Ethereum to some really crazy numbers as well. And then, of course, there's so many other crypto altcoins out there that are likely to see spot ETFs in the future as well. Now, what are these spot ETFs and why are they so important? Well, Bitcoin spot ETF is essentially, or Ethereum spot ETF, is essentially going to get a lot more institutional level money piling in to hold the asset. Unlike futures markets and, looking at whether or not you're looking at a derivative market or a futures market to that degree, where you're just essentially gambling on whether the price goes up or down, the spot element is basically going to mean that there's going to be institutional level investors or asset managers such as BlackRock that are going to have to hold BTC. That is going to basically decrease the amount of supply, as there is going to be a massive spike in demand as well. These things are going to drive such a significant demand and see imbalance in that supply-demand metric that's going to drive Bitcoin's price to some phenomenal numbers. 100,000, 200,000, a million? Anyone's kind of guess at this point, but I do want to kind of stress that those numbers are very realistic, which of course you can say $1 million Bitcoin, multiply the circulating supply of Bitcoin by the price, and you're going to get a really crazy market cap. And I know there's going to be some of you out there that aren't going to believe just what kind of market cap is going to get achieved here. And again, understanding that market cap isn't the amount of money that's going into a project or into a cryptocurrency, but everything to do with a very basic calculation. We've been through this a number of times, and it still seems to trip up retail investors, specifically with that $1 trillion idea in their heads. Nonetheless, the imbalance between supply and demand is going to be driving Bitcoin's price to some very phenomenal numbers. And I personally think that we're going to see some pretty decent growth to 100K very quickly. And from there, I think it's only really a few steps before we get to $250,000 and even $500,000 Bitcoin. So the idea and the applications behind Bitcoin spot ETFs is absolutely massive and not something to be understated. Of course, though, we have to appreciate there's a process to each of these things. We cannot just simply enjoy, $1 trillion Bitcoin in absolutely zero time whatsoever, or multi-trillion dollar Bitcoin in no time at all. Essentially, there's a bit of a process here. The applications have gone in, we've seen delays, we've seen some rejections, and this isn't the first time these things have been applied for either. It's the first time BlackRock have been involved though, and that's a pretty big thing. Ultimately, I don't think BlackRock have ever really been denied something like this, and I think with considering the amount of people that have interest in this Bitcoin spot ETF, I can't imagine that it's going to get rejected either. And if it does, I think it will be overturned very quickly, should that be the case. Now, of course, 𝗕𝗘𝗪𝗀𝗃 could completely shock us all and do some pretty crazy things when it comes to these spot ETFs. But for now, I'm pretty confident that a Bitcoin spot ETF from BlackRock will be approved. And I think we're going to see a lot of money flowing into Bitcoin. Billions, hundreds of billions flowing in, which will drive trillions in market cap value, if you understand how those are actually derived and work. So Bitcoin spot ETF is pretty big, right? And in January, we're expecting the Bitcoin spot ETF to be approved or delayed. I'm not expecting a rejection. Ultimately, in January 2024, we're going to either see some fantastic news with approvals or just kicking that can down the road, and the old clown over at Gensler's laboratory of the SEC is basically going to basically just continue to drag his feet. But nonetheless, I think an approval is imminent nonetheless. Now, for the approval, I imagine that we'll probably actually start seeing the price of Bitcoin drop. And the reason for this will be all those early investors starting to sell the news that an approval has actually occurred. And this only generally happens because there isn't going to be a product straight away. There's no billions of dollars just sat waiting for the approval stamp before they can kind of come on in. That's not quite how this thing works. Like I said, there's a process to this stuff. Ultimately, I reckon we're about 3 to 6 months after approval that we'll actually see a Bitcoin spot ETF launch. And it's at that launch that you'll start seeing money flow into Bitcoin, and you'll start to see very, very good aggressive growth back to the upside. And I reckon it's going to be such an aggressive move, the word parabolic will probably actually for the first time make sense. So for Bitcoin, we find ourselves in a very interesting spot. I expect a bit of a reduction in price as we kind of finish off this year and go into next year, and that's a huge opportunity should we choose to acknowledge it. Now, later in the year, 2024, we might find that a Bitcoin spot ETF coincides with the Bitcoin halving event. Now, what is a Bitcoin halving event? Well, Bitcoin halving essentially is the idea, it's not even an idea, it's the fact that the rewards for mining Bitcoin are halved. Now, that in itself has a lot of implications, specifically as time progresses, because as you halve Bitcoin's rewards, miners earn less money. So they are kind of really driven on price pushing up higher. The Bitcoin maxis, for example, will tell you, Bitcoin is, store of value. It's the only true cryptocurrency. It's going to the moon, etc. Right? And they're not wrong necessarily, but it is driven from this idea that you haven't really got an option other than Bitcoin to continue to push up in price. And the reasoning and the logic behind this is quite simple. Over time, the amount that you can earn from mining Bitcoin is halved every 4 years, and therefore your returns on your, your job of validating transactions as a miner essentially is getting harder and harder, and your returns are getting lower and lower. So obviously the price action of Bitcoin has to continue to grow in order to make it sustainable to be a Bitcoin miner, to mine Bitcoin. And so we kind of find yourself in that situation where Bitcoin halving events, halving the rewards for the miners and the people who are actually validating transactions, they have to see returns on their investments. Otherwise, what's the point in running a miner? What's the point in being a validator for Bitcoin if you are losing money rather than making money? As in, it costs so much for the energy consumption on the proof of work protocol for you to actually make a sustainable business there. So you are, of course, going to have to see returns on investment that are very, very significant to balance out the cost of actually running the operation. So over time, it becomes very hard to be a profitable Bitcoin miner unless, of course, the price action of Bitcoin goes up steadily with it. And again, I still see a potential problem here that could span into 20, 40 years down the line, where it's so difficult to actually see profits being turned with Bitcoin unless Bitcoin is hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars per coin. Now, coming back into 2024, the Bitcoin halving event is going to be a bit of a catalyst to a point, only because it's going to generate more eyeballs on the actual protocol. Ultimately, a lot of people believe that a Bitcoin halving event is the start of a bullish market. It's not, but it's what the common belief is. Ultimately, it hasn't actually had a huge impact on the supply-demand metrics for driving price for quite some time. But nonetheless, it happens every 4 years, and there is a bit of a cycle here, and we can see a lot more FOMO, a lot more activity on kind of the search volumes and that kind of stuff for Bitcoin as we kind of get closer and as we kind of have a Bitcoin halving event. So a Bitcoin halving event is pretty positive news, and I reckon we're going to see that Bitcoin halving event in April 2024 coinciding with potentially a Bitcoin spot ETF launch, and I think we're going to be like a rocket straight out of any potential bearish structures that we see, moving north of $100,000. And so I think 2024 is going to be a very, very good and very, very important year for Bitcoin, but also the entire crypto market, generally speaking. So let me know what your thoughts are on all of this in the comments down below. Are you as bullish as I am in 2024, or are you a little bit more conservative? Let me know in the comments down below. I'm going to leave the video there though. If you have found it useful and informative, smash that like button. I do appreciate that. If you're new, subscribe. If you haven't yet joined us in Discord, why not check it out? Link is in the description down below. Until the next one though, guys, have a fantastic day.